This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader, you have come to the right place. Today's guest is Gwendolyn Binder, who holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins, 15 years in the industry now. Now, before industry, she was the director of translational research at UPenn for 5 years. And then at Adaptimmune, she rose to the chief technology officer. And now she's the president of science and technologies at Cabaletta Bio. Her scientific expertise is in engineered T-cell therapies. And along with being a world-class scientist and a hard worker, she's an amazing leader. And she's here to share her insights. Gwendolyn Binder, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Really pleased to be here.
No, my pleasure. And I wanted to start off with this cute story that happened this morning. So as you know, my youngest daughter's name is Gwen as well. Well, my wife has access to my calendar because she throws things on my calendar regularly. And so she saw Gwen Binder in my calendar and she read it as Gwen's binder. So she was asking me, like, where's this binder we have to send to Gwen's school today? So,
yeah, well, I appreciate you saying my last name correctly. It oftentimes is mistaken for Binder, so.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to start off by saying, you know, I've always known you as a very hard worker, and I appreciate your leadership insights. And when we went over the podcast and we were started to talk about leadership, you told me that you're an accidental leader. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, it was, I always laugh when people ask me questions about leadership because it's certainly nothing I set out to be. I didn't set out to be in charge of anything or be at the top of anything. I really, being trained as a viral immunologist in the early days, really set out to do good work. And when I started going into what was a brand new space, basically, I asked myself, you know, where can I be useful? You know, instead of really thinking, where can I become the most well-known person, I asked myself, where can I really advance the ball for patients? And that's basically what I've always done. And sometimes that takes removing your ego a little bit to really look to see, you know, where is the important work, where does it need to be done? And I just was kind of fortunate to then have the opportunity to continue to grow, and I had positions of greater and greater responsibility, and then all of a sudden I found myself needing to learn some things about leadership and how to get other leaders to work together to advance the ball, and here I am on your podcast as an accidental leader.
Well, the takeaway for me is, you know, instead of trying to think, how can I climb the ladder, it's how can I be of most use continually? Yeah. And as that happens, you just continue to rise.
Yeah. I mean, I always see myself as fortunate being in a growth industry. And also, I think there's some unique elements of the field I'm in, because to advance engineered T-cell therapy, it requires a collaboration across multiple groups. And so it actually benefits from having somebody who can reach many different kinds of people and bring them together. That turns out to be a really important quality in this field. So, you know, I guess I'm fortunate.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a great leadership quality too. But as a self-proclaimed accidental leader, what was the biggest leap that you had to make from individual contributor into a leadership role?
Yeah, I think this is really common for scientists. So as a trained scientist, I'm used to looking at the data, and it's pretty easy to present data. For example, if you have confidence in your data and you put it together and you've discussed it a couple of times, well, you can get up there and you can present it, and you know, people can't argue with the data, and there's pretty well-worn paths for how you do these things. And the thing with leadership is it's completely unpredictable. You know, I think of it sometimes as a stream. You know where maybe the start of that stream is, you know where the end is, and you know the most efficient way to get from one place to the other, but there's all sorts of roadblocks and stones, and all you can do is sort of follow the flow and try to adjust things along the way, and that takes a completely different way of thinking and a comfort with uncertainty and an entrepreneurial attitude that may be difficult for people trained maybe originally in science. So I think that was one of the things I really had to embrace, and I had to develop my confidence around, and I think that can be common for technically trained people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because when you're a scientist, here's the right answer.
Right.
But when you're a leader dealing with people, it's a lot more complex. There might not be a one right answer.
Yeah.
Both parties may be right.
Exactly. I mean, there's oftentimes multiple answers and no right answer. And it's just, how do you get people to hold hands and say, okay, we don't know, but we are all okay with this decision we are going to take to move forward together, because if you can't get people to come together, you will not be successful. So unless there is one right answer, of course, which there rarely is.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Now, when I first met you, you were right in that transitionary period, going from an individual contributor to a manager. And usually when you're in that phase, the hardest thing is going from a very high performing individual contributor to then trying to have your success measured through other people. And as I mentioned in the introduction, like, what I observed was an amazingly hard worker. How did you make that transition from high performer to having success through other people?
Yeah, I mean, you met me at my most uncomfortable time. It's a combination of things. I mean, I did apply, sort of some ruthless perseverance. I take inspiration from a lot of different places. I see that others can do it, so I believe I can if I can just figure it out. There are a lot of resources out there, so getting coaching experience, talking to others who, I think it's very helpful to look for people who are maybe 5 years ahead of where I am, or a person can look for someone who's 5 years ahead of where they are, who they respect, and kind of talk through things. I think having those trusted advisors is quite important. And you just have to keep going. And you may succeed, you may fail, but it's not, if you're working hard and you believe in what you're doing and you have a strong foundation, it's not personal. Success and failure, can come independent, and you do learn. It sounds routine to say this, but you really do learn a lot from things that don't go the way you expect them to. It doesn't necessarily have to be failure, and success sometimes could come too easy. So just keep trying and try to develop a personal vision for yourself, for what you want to be, what impact do you want to have.
There, I appreciate it. And now that you've had years of leadership, what do you think makes a great leader?
So, I was reflecting on this question actually before this podcast, and one of the things I was thinking is leadership does depend a little bit on the situation and the context. So, one of the classic examples, of course, is of Churchill. He was a great wartime leader, but he would have made a terrible routine leader, right? And I do think leadership, maybe in a highly structured political environment, is different than a leader in a more nimble, unstructured environment. But all of that said, I think there are some foundational qualities, and as a leader, I think the key is really to unleash the potential of others and align a unified vision, because again, this might sound maybe a little bit trite, but it's not meant to be this way. The power of people is really great, and if you can get people's individual missions and passions aligned with their capabilities, and you can do that in a team environment, that takes a lot of effort. And as a leader, it's invisible effort, because the leader gets no reward for doing that well, and only gets attention if it's not done well. And that's why I think, leadership is not a glamorous thing. It should be an invisible thing, and it should be getting the team to really shine. And that can happen in any situation. And the skills then, specific skills you need as a leader can be situation dependent. So if you're working in a highly politicized environment, you will need to have those skills. If you're working in a highly nimble environment, you'll have to have sort of those entrepreneurial scrappy skills. And it really, you can align those skill sets with your personality. But at the end of the day, if you want to be a good leader, you're really going to have to make it not about you. You're going to have to make it about the team and your people.
I'm glad you said that, because I'm just thinking back on my life. There were times where I wanted to be the leader, but it was about me. And, I can see my growth that now it's less about me and more about other people. And that's a hard leap for a lot of people to make. I mean, I remember you telling me about the absence of ego and how that's a critical part of leadership too. You want to speak more about that?
Yeah, sure. We do all have ego. I wouldn't trust anybody who says they don't have an ego, but I think your experience is similar, and part of that is just human maturation. Not that you're immature if you're trying to develop yourself as an individual, but I think it is, when you're younger and you're trying to establish yourself, you do think about yourself more, but being open to the fact that you want to cultivate that reward of leadership, you can really advance something that at the end of the day is so much more meaningful. That takes years to cultivate. And the thing that I stumble against a lot is there's definitely times when I feel like I'm not recognized, or I wish I were like the pinnacle of that academic thing or something like that, but instead I'm spending my brain space on leading the team, not just reading papers, writing papers, or whatever it is for that particular person. And that's sort of the tiger that I have to grapple with a lot, and I have to remind myself why I'm here and what actually is meaningful to me. If I wanted to be that academic leader, then I would have invested my effort into that. That's not actually where I want to be. I actually want to be where I am right now. But that doesn't mean that the ego doesn't come forward sometimes. And I think it can be really destructive if it's not recognized. Yeah.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that hits home with me quite a bit. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. I'm sure a lot of the listeners will benefit from that. Yeah. And another way a leader is evaluated is not only by production, but it's also by the culture. Mm-hmm. And in your role now, it's like other leaders are reporting to you. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be very deliberate about the culture that you're creating, because then that permeates through the whole organization. This episode is brought to you by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. When pharma executives need to make critical hires, they go to the experts at K. Bassman, pharma's one-source staffing solution. Visit kbic.com. Now back to the episode. What are some of the best practices that have helped you shape the culture there?
Yeah, so I think one of the best things I can do is set the example of being vulnerable and being courageous about being vulnerable. And I can only do that if I also have a clear objective mission, like first establish the vision, but then be honest, vulnerable about, hey guys, help me with this, or this is what I don't know, or this is what I need us to figure out, or this is what we know, this is what we don't know, or share my experiences, because then that makes it okay for other people to be open about what they know and what they don't know. If they can't do those things, you end up with something that isn't the best product. That is one thing that I think is one of the most important things, and I used to think it was a weakness of mine, and now I right now it seems like a strength in this position. But then I think we have a huge focus on culture in our company, and it doesn't just come from me, but it really suits me. So aligning with people on continuous feedback, for example, and things like that. So we have very clear values at our company. We have annual surveys, and we respond to those surveys for continuous improvement. And I think that, combined with us as individual leaders, showing that, it's not about us, it's about, how can we really empower others in the company, and doing that in a concrete way. I think that really helps a lot. And yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the culture is a teamwork culture.
Yeah.
You had mentioned something to me one time that you felt leadership, as it relates to culture, is deprogramming people of I.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I thought that was such a clever way of saying that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the ego conversation. I think it is a shift in thought, coming into a company, thinking about what can this company do for me? What can I get out of this role? How can I show that I have this work product, or I'm of value? And more about, how I sort of started this discussion, which is coming into a situation and saying, okay, where are we? What are the needs? What can I bring? And when I hire people, I as a hiring manager, I'm very aware that I'm not just looking for somebody who's going to do what we need. We need to provide satisfaction and an opportunity of growth for the person. And I think, so it goes both ways, right? So if somebody's coming in and they're all about the title, or they're all about who are my reports, or they're all about, how are you going to judge me? I mean, those things are important, don't get me wrong. But if that's the first thing you're coming forward with, instead of, oh, I believe in this therapy, I want to help patients, I love this culture, then that says a lot about people. But it goes both ways for sure.
I love those thoughts. It's really great. And thanks for giving me some tips about what you're looking for when you're hiring people. That's good to know. One of the other things that you mentioned that I thought was really good is how intentional you are with helping other leaders know what's happening in other departments. I think that's such a valuable nugget for people that are leading leaders. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me how much people don't know what is going on. We can have as many all hands meetings in the company as we want, but really, when it gets down to it, and an individual is trying to prosecute their responsibilities, the pieces of the puzzle that they're not aware of, and I think probably one of the most important things I do at the company is I talk to people throughout the various departments and kind of fill in those gaps for them, because I think once people have all the pieces of the puzzle, then they're much more empowered to make those individual decisions. And as you're scaling an organization, you need each individual to be fully empowered in order to achieve your goals, because it's no longer a top-down type of thing. It's really it's really the various team members, sort of moving forward in the front, but they all have to have the same information. And not all line leaders are giving the same information, just because, that's just human nature. So it's good to have that consistency from an individual or two throughout the organization that takes the time to share, I think.
Well, you had mentioned, having a clear vision for where the team and the company is going. Mm-hmm. How often do you bring up that vision back up with the people, especially if you're, talking to different line leaders?
All the time. So, we talk about it a lot. Like in our leadership team, for example, we spend a lot of time talking with each other. And one of the things I don't like about that is it takes a lot of time. But one of the things I love about that is that it takes a lot of time to always be on the same page. And when you are all on the same page, then I'm 100% confident when I talk to all the various leaders across the company about what our vision is, what's staying the same, what's changing. In biotech, the data is always changing, the landscape is always changing, and you need to have a strong foundation of vision, and then you need to be able to communicate what's changing and how that impacts things, if at all, clearly and continuously. And yeah.
Well, Graham, I'm really glad that you brought all that up. And, just to piggyback on something you said earlier, when it comes to hiring.
Yeah.
And you're looking for that right fit culturally. And you said you look for certain things, but are there certain questions or different ways that other hiring managers can try to ferret out if someone is going to be a cultural fit for their organization?
It's hard, and it. There's a couple of things we do. I mean, certainly we do have a couple of very good interviewers at the company that can ask some good questions to get under the hood of a person. And certainly I think behavioral questions, or, asking people, tell me about a time, and then give a situation to really understand then from that person, and the situation would be relevant to the job they're stepping into. But if you're asking the candidate to tell you about a time that a certain situation happened, you'll learn a lot about how the elements of that were important to that person, and then also how they navigated the situation. That's just a standard interview skill. Sometimes we'll take our values and we'll give one or two and ask a person, what does that mean to them? Because if a person is like, sort of like, you learn a lot by how a person reacts to that kind of question. And yeah, and that's all you can really do. You do have to understand a person's technical skill, but as you're hiring in more and more senior positions, the technical capabilities are more assumed, and it's more about their soft skills. And so it's really that scenario interviewing that I find really helps. Oh, and the one other thing that we always do is we usually make people present, even if it isn't a technical position, because seeing how a person pulls together a presentation and then how they are in a stress situation, getting up and talking in front of people, says a lot about a person. And it's just simple. What do they like about the company, and a couple case studies from their past that are relevant to the job. And I find between those things, we have done a pretty good job with this, what we call no regret hires. Hiring is one of the most difficult things an organization can do. It's always worth taking the time to get the right person.
I've been using that exact phraseology, no regret hires.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, for years I've been saying mishire, but the no regret hire is just a classic thing. And I think I will steal from you. Here's like a word or a phrase or something that is foundational to the culture. What does that mean to you? Because what I've been doing is more like asking, tell me about a time when you showed this quality. But I really think by asking what it means to them, you're going to get a much more open-ended, honest answer.
Yeah, definitely. And to take the pressure off as well. I mean, what we do sometimes is out of our 8, we say, here's 3, pick one. And then, and it's not a litmus test which one they pick, but it allows them a little bit of choice in terms of what they're comfortable to talk about in that moment.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing those insights. And when we spoke before the show, you mentioned that you really don't think of leader as a gender, and that whatever gender a person is, it really didn't make much difference when it came to leadership.
Yeah.
But is there any specific advice you would give to female leaders that are listening?
Yeah, I mean, this probably could fill up a whole podcast. So I'll say a couple of things. As I mentioned to you beforehand, all of my life, I have not acknowledged that being a woman has been any different than being a man and being a leader until recently, oddly enough. And it's not because I've seen any more friction as I've gotten older, but I have come to acknowledge differences. And I think, gender is a huge discussion in society right now. And so if I were just to say that if you take males and females in this particular discussion and you think about it as a bell curve of characteristics, because they do overlap in some areas, but they're definitely distinct, both in terms of upbringing, culturally, different across cultures, as well as biologically, I think it's fair to acknowledge that there are going to be differences. And when I say that I acknowledge, and of course there's generational differences. So in my generation, at the level of leadership I'm at today, what I have started to acknowledge is that I think that especially men have been raised in an environment where there's more routine competition. and more routine performance opportunities. And women in general, again, generalizing, have not had that opportunity. And so what I have found as a characteristic that maybe I am not as well practiced in, that maybe has been more beneficial at my level, is learning to be in full performance mode in any particular discussion at that higher leadership level. There's more flex at lower levels. There's really no flex at a higher level if you want to be a successful leader. And I think that might be one of the reasons women, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons that women might shy away from some of these higher leadership roles. And there's a lot around the discussion around why there aren't more women in leadership roles. But if we just focus on what role do women play in being in these higher leadership roles, I do think there's a tendency sometimes to shy away and say, that's not worth my energy, I don't want to play that game. I think maybe shifting our focus to say, it's not a game, it's a conditioning. I can learn that conditioning. I want to have influence. I want to be at the table. That's just one aspect to what could fill up a whole podcast, but I would say that's a big thing I've learned. Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned one of the things that that for female leaders is to really get sort of a group of trusted advisors to bounce ideas off of, to help bolster confidence in making decisions. Do you want to speak at all about that?
Yeah, I think for me, so as I mentioned before, having trusted advisors in terms of the next step of growth, and also trusted advisors, exactly as you said, so that when you go into that boardroom or you go into that leadership team, again, every meeting you're at the top, you're at that performance. There is no room for mistakes. And so you're not just showing up to a meeting. You prepare before that meeting. You talk to people. You get your thoughts clear. You think about all the scenarios. You're taking your 3-5-year plan and you're adjusting it before you have that 2-minute conversation. And so to have a group of people with which you can sort of gameplay that on an ongoing basis, it's absolutely essential for anyone. For anyone. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. When the game's on, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just keeping my eye on the clock. Sadly, that is all the time we have for the episode, but I can just speak for everybody that's listening, everybody that's in the Pharmaverse. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. I know I'm going to be stealing a lot of these insights, so thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Michael, for having me on. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
That wraps up another episode of the Pharmaverse. Many great leaders still lined up for you, so stay tuned and see you next time in the Pharmaverse. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.